Hey everybody, it's Party Elite here with another episode of Total Breakdown. We've got another one from the Warhammer Fantasy League today, this time with the Wood Elves of Shetland Apache facing off against the Dark Elves of Razel. I apologize if I butchered that name, please correct me in the comments if that's the case. We begin, of course, with talk of composition and deployment, and this is a very interesting map, and both sides are planning on taking advantage of that fact. You can see the Wood Elves are led by a Glade Lord atop a Forest Dragon, alongside a second Forest Dragon, and we also have a Spellslinger of Shadows atop a horse. The front line, which is a term I'm using very loosely, consists of these 4 units of Deepwood Scouts, alongside these 2 Glade Riders with Hagbane tips. Then to the left over here we have 2 units of Wild Riders tucked away in the trees, and back here we have a unit of Dryads as well. On the other side of the field, the Dark Elves are led by a Dreadlord with sword and shield on foot. Not a commander we see very often. The front line has this unit of Dread Spears up front, and then a pair of Bleak Swords, one to the left, one to the right, and then a pair of Dread Spears as well, capping off the flanks. These guys all have silver shields, so they'll stay protected from enemy ranged fire, while back here we have this line of Black Ark Corsairs and this single unit of Witch Elves, hoping to pin down enemy units with the Madness of Cain. We also have a Sorceress of Fire, providing some magical support next to this Reaper Bolt Thrower that is looking to get some damage done right from the get-go, force enemy ranged units to move around so they can't stand still, while a pair of Harpies on either side will look to harass those very same ranged units. Back here, meanwhile, we have 2 units of Cold One Knights. These guys are anti-large and armor-piercing, while to the left over here, we have 3 units of Dark Riders with shields, and they will look to move through these trees and harass, once again, those very same inevitable ranged units that the Wood Elves are likely to bring. So, again, very interesting terrain over here, very interesting deployment. Let's see how it all breaks down. Naturally, there's going to be a fair bit of skirmishing. You can see the Reaper Bolt Thrower already getting some shots into the Glade Rider with Hagbane tips over here, and as these Deepwood Scouts push in and start firing away, they will be spotted, but of course, there are some silver shields over here, so those Dread Spears aren't going to take too much damage, while in response, the Reaper Bolt Thrower fires away at some of these Deepwood Scouts now, using its infantry mode and getting a touch of damage here and there, dropping a couple of these Deepwood Scouts, but not killing any just yet. Again, just looking to do some damage as early as possible, and to the left as well, you can see these Harpies, as they move into a threatening position, do get shot up and then get forced back as these Forest Dragons peel forward, looking to get some damage done of their own. But the Dread Spears continue to eat a lot of range support, and again, not doing too much damage. Of course, they have those silver shields, so as these Harpies come a little too close to the sun, you can see these Deepwood Scouts are pulling back into a safe distance, turning around and opening fire, focusing in instead on those Harpies and looking to do a fair bit of hurt. And you can see in response, we also have these Glade Riders with their Hagbane tips moving off to the side over here, hoping to take care of these Harpies nice and early, just get rid of that potential harassment before it becomes a problem later. Over here, meanwhile, you can see the Forest Dragon is giving incessant chase to these Harpies, hoping to shut it down, maybe then changing its mind and moving into the Reaper Bolt Thrower afterwards. But the Forest Dragon over here as well, with the Glade Lord atop, is firing away, trying to get some damage done, while to the side over here, you can see as these Dark Riders with shields are just about to pop out of the trees, these Glade Riders with their Hagbane tips have actually pushed off to the side over here. Because they were chasing after the Harpies, they've ended up to the side over here, and now they've actually, inadvertently, the Harpies have forced the Wood Elves into a position where they can actually prevent this Dark Rider charge. And as they come out of the trees and they become visible, you can see more or less instantaneously these Wild Riders turn around and push off to protect this flank over here. So very quick eye there, very quick movement there, very nice to see. And as these Bleak Swords and Dread Spears stand steady, eating a lot of fire, you can see they have taken very little damage despite the concentration of range support. And again, it's just those silver shields as work. And you can see, though, as the Reaper Bolt Thrower continues to fire away and get some damage done off to the side over here, as the cavalry units are pushing in, so too do these frontline units. So sort of a concentrated effort over here, a pincer effort almost. The Hagbane tips over here will be very useful in slowing these Dark Riders down, so you'll see a couple of shots go in there, slowing these guys down with their poison, and the Wild Riders ultimately decide not to go chasing after them in the trees and stay steady over here. Instead, the Dryads as well, pulling out from behind these trees, as over here you can see Arrow of Kronos going in, trying to take care, I think, of the Sorceress of Fire, doing a little bit of damage over there, exploding, I think, just at her feet, tossing her back a little bit, so good job there, but takes a very little bit of damage, and in response is going to turn around and try to do some damage of her own. At the same time, you can see the Harpies once again pushing forward, hoping to get some work done, but unfortunately there's just way too much range support screening them away, while you can see the Sorceress, as I was saying, responds with a Fireball into the Glade Lord, and again, the Fireball just doesn't do enough, unfortunately. It just takes a touch of damage, maybe like a 10th or an 18th of its health bar gets hit by that fireball there. So an unfortunate situation, but nonetheless doing whatever the Sorceress can, of course. And you can see those Harpies now very low on health, so they're basically useless, while these Harpies over here are being chased still by this Forest Dragon. And now the Witch Elves are the focus of all of that range support. Take a look at, as all of this fire comes in, these Witch Elves are going to be completely devastated, and that's an ideal target from range. Most of these units have silver shields, except for the Black Ark Corsairs, of course, as well as the Witch Elves. Now the Witch Elves are extremely threatening for an army that is so heavily based on range, because the Madness of Cain will tie those units down and their anti-infantry capabilities will quickly just cut through any range unit. So very cleverly done there, focusing in on those Witch Elves, and take a look at how their health just drops. In comes a second volley. These guys are going to lose, or I should say these girls are going to lose all of their health, just slowly ambling towards the range support over here. But you can see they decide to pull back into safety, while back here as well we have these Dark Riders with shields now pulling back into the main lines as opposed to pushing in from this flanking opportunity, hoping to catch the Wild Riders off guard, I think. And you can see the Wild Riders themselves have sort of stayed over here. They're looking for an opportunity to dive in through the front lines if necessary, and even these range units are waiting till the very last moment before they decide to retreat. You can see those Witch Elves are just trying to get out of range over here, while off in the distance the Sorceress is hit by the Prey of Anathrema as the Glade Lord, I think, fires away, trying to get rid of that magical support, and the Witch Elves as well just dropping away, while up front over here these Bleak Swords and the Dread Spears are just about to close the gap, and at the very last moment these Deepwood Scouts are given the order to fall back. So again, waiting till the last possible moment, I think, to just pull back into safety, maximize the amount of time spent firing. At the same time, you can see the Forest Dragon over here is pushing in to try and shut down the Harpies, while all of these Dark Riders are looking for an opportunity to dive in and get involved. The Harpies to the left over here manage to get into the Deepwood Scouts, but these Wild Riders push in just in time, splitting off so that these Wild Riders are able to take care of the right flank, while these Wild Riders are able to take care of the left flank. So very nicely done once again, and just eliminating those Harpies very quickly, while over here you can see these Wild Riders waiting for that inevitable charge to come in from these Harpies. The Forest Dragon giving chase as well, and the Hagbane tips are making sure that these Harpies are slowed down. The Forest Dragon unable to catch up, unfortunately, so the Harpies are able to dive in, but basically next to the Forest Dragon. So no problem over there. All that range fire comes in. In comes the Forest Dragon as well, but take a look at these Dark Riders taking the opportunity to dive in with that distraction, but these Wild Riders are there waiting for that opportunity, diving into the Dark Riders in response and taking care of those guys extremely quickly with a rear charge, while these Hagbane tips, or rather the Glade Riders, I should say, dive in to these Dark Riders who are looking for a chance to push through the center over here alongside these Dark Riders as well. So very nicely done there by the Wood Elves, containing the aggression from all sides with multiple units coming in. Harpies, Dark Riders, just completely shut down. Beautifully done, these Wild Riders as well now, pushing in, hoping to get a rear charge into these Dark Riders. But you can see we have over here these Dread Spears closing the gap now. A dangerous situation for these Glade Riders with their Hagbane tips, so they do need to pull back, but you can see terror kicks in on these Dark Riders. Both of these Dark Riders, one of them starts to rout completely, so the Forest Dragon and these Glade Riders need to pull back into safety, while off in the distance that Reaper Bolt Thrower is able to continue firing away. So while the Sorceress of Fire has largely been taken care of, and I believe she was routing for a second there, but is now willing to stick into the fight, the Witch Elves as well have taken a lot of damage, and now they're hit by Melkot's Mystifying Miasma, slowing down their return to this fight and also causing a little bit of damage here and there. We have the Glade Lord over here turning around and looking to join in this engagement. Front lines have met now, and the Deepwood Scouts are in a bit of a precarious situation all across the board. You can see off to the side over here, these Dryads are trying to hold the line against the Cold One Knights and the Bleak Swords. There's some support coming in from the Deepwood Scouts over here, and the Wild Riders as well, taking care of some of these units over here, while the Forest Dragon is looking for an opportunity to dive in as well, staying up in the air right now as these guys slowly retreat into the woods over here, firing away as the Dark Elves try to close the gaps. These Dread Spears as well, hoping to keep these Wild Riders busy, ultimately deciding to pull back in and maybe try and take care of the Deepwood Scouts by coming in from multiple angles, but the Wild Riders as well just sitting there, not doing too much until finally seeing that opportunity and moving in up here instead to try and take care of these isolated Cold One Knights. They do not have any assistance. They have melee attack 24, melee defense 26, and the Wild Riders are 42, 23, and they have physical resistance, so not an ideal situation for those Cold One Knights should that engagement come to happen. To the right, though, you can see the Dark Elves are doing quite well. The Dryads are made to rout. The Wild Riders as well are not going to be able to hold their ground over there, so they have to fall back, while these Deepwood Scouts as well falling back into the trees while firing away still. And you can see now the Wood Elves have basically retreated into the woods, hoping to use the trees for protection, but murderous prowess kicks in, murderous mastery for the Witch Elves, but unfortunately they are all the way back over here, the Witch Elves, so their murderous mastery is largely being wasted over here, but murderous prowess across the board otherwise is going to do a fair bit of work wherever front lines are able to meet. So the Wood Elves will likely try to keep their distance right now to avoid those melee engagements and try and keep a safe distance, but unfortunately that's just going to be impossible here. You can see we've got these Black Ark Corsairs very close to closing the gap on these Deepwood Scouts, these Glade Riders with their Hagbane tips firing away at these Harpies, hoping to eliminate that harassment capability, while to the right as well you can see just the sheer quantity of Dark Elf units closing the gap towards the Wood Elves. Off in the distance, meanwhile, these Wild Riders are trying to take care of these Cold One Knights, but they do have the assistance of murderous prowess right now, so they are coming out somewhat on top. In comes the enfeebling foe, eliminating their advantage completely, so those Wild Riders are going to have a wonderful time, while you can see the Glade Lord as well looking for an opportunity to dive in somewhere, while the Reaper Bolt Thrower now is sort of in a bit of a rough spot. It's not able to do too much damage firing into the trees over here, so it has to focus in on some of these units that are out in the open, and that's just an unfortunate situation. So nicely done there by the Wood Elves, but unfortunately to the left here you can see the Deepwood Scouts are giving up on the fight. The Dread Spears over here have decided to dive into the Forest Dragon, so the Forest Dragon is not in an ideal spot either. And over here as well, you can see we've got all of these Black Ark Corsairs just closing the gap over here. These Dark Riders with shields closing the gap to these Deepwood Scouts. These Deepwood Scouts do not stand a chance with that rear charge coming in. You can see their morale is dropping, their health is dropping significantly as well. They're not made for melee, of course, while these Dryads continue to rout over here. We've got these Hagbane tips coming in, trying to slow down these Black Ark Corsairs, and these Glade Riders as well dive in response, trying to keep these VIP Deepwood Scouts safe from all of those Black Ark Corsairs and the Cold One Knights. Unfortunately, as described before, Cold One Knights are anti-large and armor-piercing, and we've got these Dread Spears coming in as well. So these Glade Riders with Hagbane tips are basically on a suicide mission. They're not going to be having a very good time. You can see these guys have already decided to pull away into safety, while off to the side over there, the Forest Dragon is still dealing with some of these Dread Spears, while the Glade Lord and the Wild Riders there are trying to eliminate these Dread Spears off. Far away, you can see the order was given to these Wild Riders to actually dive into the Reaper Bolt Thrower finally. So again, hoping to just completely eliminate that anti-large armor-piercing capability of the Reaper Bolt Thrower, especially since the Glade Lord and the Forest Dragon are both ideal targets at this stage of the battle. Meanwhile, maybe ironically, the Wood Elves are having some trouble in the woods over here, being chased down by the Dark Elves. The forests are being cleansed. You can see this massive clump over here, a beautiful target for something like the Pit of Shades, which the Spellsinger has brought to the field with her, but unfortunately she's nowhere to be seen in this vicinity. All the way over here, she's alongside those Wild Riders, providing some assistance in other ways. Not to say this was a bad decision, obviously, but it's unfortunate to see such a beautiful clump, albeit a moving clump that would have been a beautiful target for a Pit of Shades if they were held down in place by, say, some of these Glade Riders. Nonetheless, that is a moot point as these guys are closing the gaps. You can see we have a couple routes here for the Wood Elves still. These Deepwood Scouts also giving up, so the range contingent is in a very precarious situation right now. Beautifully done by the Dark Elves, shutting all these Wood Elves down, just chasing them off the field, chasing them to the edge of the field, and ultimately destroying whatever they can. You can see over here as well these Glade Riders pulling off, finally free from the oppression of the Dark Elves, looking to maybe find some open space over here and bait some of these guys in to these Wild Riders, who you can see over here have taken care of the Reaper Bolt Thrower and are now returning to the edge of the woods over here. Meanwhile, with two Forest Dragons, the Wild Riders, and the Spellsinger of Shadows, the Dread Spears have finally given up on the fight over here to the left. They were taking some care of the Forest Dragon, but ultimately they have been completely devastated from all angles. Meanwhile, you can see over here the Glade Riders with their Hagbane tips continue to fire away into the trees. Unfortunately, the bait was not entirely taken. You can see these guys are focusing in on the Deepwood Scouts, and ultimately the Deepwood Scouts, this last unit, I believe, of Deepwood Scouts has been made to completely rout. They're right at the edge of the battlefield as well, as you can see, so they will be driven off the field, unfortunately. Meanwhile, all the way over here, you can see these Harpies as well now being taken care of by the Glade Lord, again, just terrifying these guys off, eliminating the potential of harassment before it, joins the rest of the Dark Elf forces and does some serious work to, for example, these Wild Riders, holding them in place, keeping them safe from a potential charging opportunity, or also these Glade Riders with Hagbane tips over there. And now you can see the Dark Elves are largely hidden in the trees. They're moving off to the side over here, looking for, I think, isolated opportunities. For example, these Glade Riders over here are isolated. They'd make a very quick and ideal target, especially for some of these Dark Riders and the Cold One Knights if they moved in together. So you can see aggressively chasing after these Glade Riders over here, taking some fire, and the Forest Dragon over here as well, pushing in and scouting, getting some very important information for the Wood Elves. And you can see positioning itself off to the side over here, and really the Dark Elves should have noticed this. I think maybe they were micromanaging this situation a little bit right now, but they should have seen this placement. It's hard to spot the little blue highlight over here in the trees, which is why the vegetation can be really annoying at times. But when the Forest Dragon or any dragon moves off to your side like that, you know exactly what's coming. And take a look at this glorious use of the breath ability. Comes in from this side, and these Black Ark Corsairs get more or less completely obliterated. Their morale drops. They're wavering right now. Their health is at basically a fifth of what it was earlier, and that's a terrible situation for them to be in. While over here you can see we've got all of these units closing the gap in on the Glade Riders over here. Very close to closing the gap. The Glade Riders decide to pull back into safety of these trees. Unfortunately, run out of ammunition as well, so they're in a very precarious situation as the gap is being closed. Meanwhile, over here we do have the Glade Lord diving in on the Dreadlord, hoping to take care of Dark Elf leadership right now, and there's some massive clumps over here, but you can see the Dark Elves aren't really in a position to deal with two units of Forest Dragons. The Glade Lord as well as the Forest Dragon will be a very dangerous situation, while off in the distance over here, the Wild Riders very nicely pulled into these Dark Riders with shields as they were giving chase to these Glade Riders with Hagbane tips. So again, beautifully done there, just chasing down some of those isolated units, but you can see in response we've got these Dark Riders coming in as well, hoping to eliminate both of these units, but at the same time, of course, the Forest Dragon and the Glade Lord are going to be doing a lot of work in these clumps over here. You can see a nice rear charge coming in from this Forest Dragon into the Blackguard Corsairs. They take a fair bit of damage, and of course, that Forest Dragon is able to take to the air more or less right away. Meanwhile, we also have another Shatter going down over here, and ultimately, a GG from the Dark Elves, as the Wood Elves are just left with too many tools. Now, the skirmishing capabilities of the Wood Elves and the micro of Shetland Apache were on full display in this battle. Despite that, the Dark Elves did very well in their persistent chase of the archers, running them off the field, though it took a fair bit of time to do so. The Dark Elves came pretty well prepared with artillery and harpies and a massive cavalry contingent, but the two Forest Dragons and Wood Elf cavalry was well placed and maneuvered to hold the Dark Elves at bay. As always, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Total War content and keep sending in those battle replays. I think it's one of the best ways to learn, and it's always nice to highlight such amazing battles from the community. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the battlefield.